Let's lay out the basic argument. So you're not concerned with any kind of temporary European malaise or questions of slow economic growth, which is a lot of what we hear on the other side of the big water. Again, I'm quoting you. Europe today has little desire to reproduce itself, fight for itself, or even take its own side in an argument. By the end of the lifespans of most people currently alive in Europe, Europe will not be Europe, and the peoples of Europe will have lost the only place in the world we had to call home, close quote. 2 years later, you stand, but that's a very dramatic statement. 2 years later, you stand by that.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, in the lifespans of, as I say, most people, it'll be a different place. It already is. And I lay some of that out in remorseless detail in The Strange Death of Europe. Sometimes when things happen relatively slowly, people get used to things, they adapt. I give the example of the census in the UK, the last census in the UK, which showed that in 23 out of 33 London boroughs, people who identify as white British are in the minority in those boroughs. So that in the lifespan of, I mean, you can either like that, dislike it, or feel benign about it. But that's a massive change in just one person's lifespan already.
John Cleese tweeted, as we taped this, I think it was last week, John Cleese of Monty Python fame tweeted, "London no longer seems to be an English city." I think that's a close paraphrase, if not a quotation. And he was attacked the attack, as attacks are on Twitter.
Yeah.
But he was correct.
He was correct. And by the way,
factually correct.
What he said is effectively what is boasted about by politicians, including the Mayor of London and the previous Mayor of London. They say, it's an international city. They're very happy about that.
Right.
But if somebody says, well, that means it's not an English city anymore, then they attack somebody like, whether it's John Cleese, me, or whoever, for heresy. I mean, it's very interesting, by the way, isn't it? I mean, John Cleese was attacked for the heresy of the Life of Brian, 40 years ago. Yes. He's attacked by the clerics now. It's just they're the clerics of the far left and the social justice movements and so on. They just happen not to wear frocks like his previous critics. But it's the same phenomenon. I've debated and discussed these issues for years now, and I know every one of the moves that people do. The number of dishonest moves, things like, that's not the case. Okay, that is the case. That is the case, but you shouldn't say it. Or, that is the case, and it's great, suck it up.
The death of Europe did not happen overnight. To those with a watchful eye, like Douglas Murray, it's been clear that this was coming all along. He tried to warn everyone, but his warnings fell on deaf ears. As the months go by, we watch Europe lose its core culture and stability that it was once built upon. The cause of all of this is simple. This is a failure of leadership, because at the end of the day, the only ones to blame are the governments of Europe for allowing millions of illegal Islamic immigrants who hate Europe into their society. The only way for Europe to ever fall was to allow the intermixing of the people of Europe with Muslim immigrants, until eventually you lose the European culture and Islamists establish their culture onto Europe, destroying the European laws and way of life in the process.
To come back to the realities of what we're now confronting, and you've been writing about this immigration policy over the years, I don't know what a coherent immigration policy for Western countries might look like. You might have an observation on that, but it hasn't been coherent for a long time. Nowhere more so, I would argue, than in America today on their southern borders. So we have large numbers of barbarians inside our gates. That's the reality. I mean, look at France.
Yep.
They must be really nervous. Mind you, they're pretty tough.
Yeah,
they're police forces. But what might happen, in your view, if the situation in the Middle East escalates? Are we going to have more? I shouldn't probably say this. I don't want to sound alarmist, but we shouldn't forget 9/11. Who do we have in our midst now, and what might they do?
Well, we have a crux point, in my view, coming up in the UK on the 11th of November, when there is Muslim groups, Palestinian groups, pro-Hamas groups in the UK have announced what they call the Million Man March in this city on Remembrance Day, on Armistice Day, when they will again defile the cenotaph and the statues of our dead and our war leaders. And I believe that the British people will not take this lying down. I think that the police in the UK have failed by allowing people to march through our streets, past our monuments and holy places, past Westminster Abbey and much more, chanting Allahu Akbar and Jihad, Jihad. The police have protected the people doing that and have tried to arrest anyone who dislikes that.
Is it their fault?
The police, yeah. Many of the policemen themselves are highly frustrated about this, I know that. But it's the advice that they have. They don't want to be like the French police who run in and baton everyone over the head. Although, by the way, it's worth noting that the Republic in France has had the president banned protests, and the protests went ahead. Very, very bad sign in the life of this republic. But in the UK, it's different. Our police force behave differently, and policing by consent and all of these sorts of things. But clearly they've lost control of the streets. Now, is it time to send in the army at some point? Probably yes. But if the army will not be sent in, then the public will have to go in, and the public will have to sort this out themselves. And it'll be very, very brutal. It'll be very brutal because there is no the soul of England, the soul of Britain, is about to be trampled on very, very visibly by people who are gleeful in their trampling. And they have defaced and defiled all of our holy places. And I know that the British soul is awakening and stirring with rage at what these people are doing. These people came into our house. Many of them broke into our house illegally. Many of them were never wanted here. And they have come here. They have betrayed all of our attempts at hospitality. They've spat in our faces, and now they want to trample everything we have underfoot. No.
Douglas Murray has predicted the fall of Europe for the past 10 years, but it's clear that his warnings have fallen on deaf ears. Today, before our very own eyes, we see Islamic immigrants taking Europe by storm, and at this rate, there won't be a Europe left for Europeans to call home, because stats suggest that by 2050, even Britain will be 50% Muslim, and by 2050, Islam will comprise over 20% of the entirety of Europe. The fall of Europe, however, has been inevitable, because you can't expect anything else to have happened when you open your border to a group of people who hate your civilization, laws, and way of life, and invite them to join your society. You simply cannot feed a snake and expect it to eventually not bite you when the time is right. The bad news is the damage has been done, but the good news is that it's still not too late to stand up for Europe and stop this madness before it gets too far. Europe can learn a thing or two from great nations like Poland with strong immigration laws, which keeps the people and culture of Poland safe. Will Europe follow in these footsteps or be trampled upon? Only time will tell, along with the strength of the backbone of those who live in Europe.